Yo, what is up, you guys? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, I'll be finding out what is the best Nintendo Game Boy. Now, in this one, we're not going to be talking about Game Boy Advances. We're only going to be talking about the Game Boy Color all the way to the original. That's it. All the four main ones that were released at that time, those are the ones we're going to be talking about. Which one's the best one, and which one do I think you should choose on your type of playing style, honestly. So let's go ahead and get right into the video. So let me go to set those over there. So we're going to start off with the original Game Boy. This brick. I call it brick, but I call it brick in the most loving way possible. This is the main reason why you can play your games portably, and the most favorited way on how to play games portably. A lot of people love this system, loved as well. Whenever it first released, it was released with Tetris packed into the system. Originally, however, they were going to sell Mario Land with it, but they decided to go ahead and change it. Because I have Mario Land right here, but they were going to release Mario Land with the system. But they soon found out by the creator of Tetris that while Mario Land may help the Game Boy appeal to kids, Tetris would help the Game Boy appeal to everybody. Young men, old men, kids, young people who are just trying to find out what they like. Anything. Anybody could get into a game of Tetris and get sucked into the game easily, right then and there. But the Game Boy was loved by a lot of people, and it sold a lot of copies. It sold 118 million units in the US alone, and it had so many good games. Some of my favorites are Super Mario Land, Tetris, Pokemon Blue, Mortal Kombat, and Donkey Kong Land. Those are some of the main titles that a lot of people love to play on this system, but it's my favorite as well. So the most favorited ones, obviously, was Pokemon and Mario Land, but there were a lot of other ones that some people liked, like including people who liked Zelda. Zelda Link's Awakening was a game that was released for the Game Boy, and a lot of people loved it who played Ocarina of Time, and not Link's Awakening, and played the SNES version. I forgot what it was called, but the SNES version, that was released after this one, I'm pretty sure. And before anybody found out that this was a thing, and they owned the SNES, I bet they were pretty excited that they could play portably. However, a lot of people seem to not like the system for a few other reasons. Number one, it's bulky as crap. That's why I call it a brick, because quite literally, you could easily be playing this in the middle of the sidewalk, just walking down, and if someone was trying to rob you, you could throw this at them and win a fight. I mean, literally, if somebody tried to fight you, you could just throw this at them and knock them out with one hit easily. That's how much this weighs and how big this is. Like, in comparison to a Game Boy game, per se. This is how much bigger it is. And Game Boy games are already a little bit big, so they're pretty good size difference. As y'all know, it plays Game Boy games. It was released with them, and yeah. You gotta blow into the card sometimes to get them to work. And this system, especially this one, had a pea green screen is what some people called it. A lot of people called it that because of how it looked, of the green colors. It had dark green and green. Those are the only two colors that it was in. And a lot of people were not excited about that. Now, my system, don't get this wrong. If you see the buttons on the system, and they look completely different from the original Game Boys, this is an original Game Boy. It's just that for some reason I had these buttons from the person I bought it on eBay from. But normally it'd have a black D-pad and red buttons. But I kind of like the blue, because I play Pokemon Blue in the matches. But, yeah. This system, however, also, Nintendo found out a way to help out some people. You see that right there? See, a blue part goes away every time that I swipe the game. Right there. It's put there to help in case of somebody tried to rip out the game while you were trying to play it, because if they were able to, and they did that multiple times, it would ultimately ruin the game system, and you'd have to buy a new one, because it'd be messing it up. But Nintendo found that out and decided to help out some people in case of their little siblings or some people that just didn't like them, wanted to ruin their game session. That's pretty neat for them to do, and a pretty good thing. Next is the revision to the Game Boy Pocket, which was released, I think, about 7 years after the Game Boy original. It was originally released because of how bulky the Game Boy was. People wanted a smaller system that could fit in their jeans pockets, or just that they could be able to put in a bag and not make like enough room to where they can't put anything else in it. Now finally the screen is in black and white instead of green and puke. It's in black and white. It still played original Game Boy games, and that's the only type of games it would play. You'd put it in, turn it on, you just play. Now, the thing is about this one, instead of taking 4 AA batteries, just like the original did, the original Game Boy took 4 AA batteries for 35 hours of battery life. The Game Boy Pocket takes 2 AAA batteries for around 15 to 20 hours of battery life, depending on how often you take out the batteries. If you don't take out the batteries at all and put them back in, it lasts for about 20 hours. But it was basically the original Game Boy, just made smaller. That's the only difference, and took different batteries. That's the only difference that the Game Boy Pocket had. Besides, however, it took a smaller cable. The original Game Boy, it took a bigger adapter, as you could see, than the Game Boy Pocket. But there were still some cables that you can get that would connect the two systems, so you could be able to trade Pokemon and high scores, which was pretty neat. But also with this one, say like you're playing at nighttime, like just say you're playing during the daytime, you can see the screen, and then, uh-oh, it's nighttime. What am I going to do? That's when the Worm Light was announced. You could finally play your Game Boy games during the nighttime with a Worm Light. Basically an accessory that would plug into your Game Boy, and you would be able to see your Game Boy game during the nighttime and play it. It was really neat for those late night game sessions where you really wanted to play a game, but no one had a light, which was really neat at the time, and a lot of people seemed to like the idea. So yeah, but the Game Boy Pocket is more of like a Game Boy. If you love the original but you wear jeans, or the Game Boy original is too big and clunky for you, so you would need to get the Game Boy Pocket, which has a better screen, which is in black and white instead of green and puke, and it came in a bunch of different colors. It came in red, yellow, green, and blue. Oh, and see-through. See-through was one of the options. But it was a really neat system that a lot of people liked, and it was a bit cheaper than the original Game Boy. The original Game Boy sold for $89 at launch, while this one sold for $69 at launch, which is ironic because the Game Boy original was released in 1989 and sold for $89, while this one was released in 96 and it sold for $69, which is swapped, which seemed really neat to me. Now we move on to one that a lot of people was a bit confused about. This is the Game Boy Light, released in only Japan and not the USA for some reason. If this thing was to release in the US during the time of its release, it would have skyrocketed in profit. A lot of people would have bought it, and it would have sold way more than any other Game Boy. And the reason of that is, say this. Say if we take Mario Land, for example. Say if you want to play Mario Land, and you just want to like play during the day. You swap it on, and you get ready to play during the day. But say, oh, wait, it's nighttime. How am I going to play it? Do I need to get one of the so-called adapters to help me? No. You just flip it over. Bam, a backlight. That's right, this Game Boy had a backlight in it, which was very neat at the time and was very cool to have for a system like this. It was the only Game Boy, in fact, to have a backlight at the time, and it was only sold in Japan, which made a lot of people very angry. I almost forgot how to talk, but it made a lot of people angry. Basically, it was the size of a Game Boy Pocket with the back battery cover of a Game Boy Color. And it had a backlight. Those were the main things. So if you think about it, it's if the body of a Game Boy Pocket had the battery cover of a Game Boy Color mixed with the screen of an AGS 101 Game Boy Advance SP. Confusing, but you get the idea. It was really awesome for people who were able to actually, get this thing on their hands. But with the backlight, it was just really good to have for a lot of people. All it takes is 2 AA batteries, and you're able to have 12 hours of battery life with the light on and 18 with it off, which is really good. It's already better battery life with the light off than the Game Boy Pocket, and on top of that, only 3 hours less with a backlight. That's pretty good. Honestly, Nintendo had it going good for them at that time whenever they released it in Japan. Japan, you get that, right? Only in Japan. But if it was released in America, then who knows how many Game Boys they could have sold and what profit they could have made. But, released in the same year as the Game Boy Light, in 1998, they released the Game Boy Light in the early of the year. Late to 1998, they released the Game Boy Color. Now, somebody tell me what was going on with Nintendo. Was their fire code strict? Were they having to go cheap? Was their employees eating cereal with water? Because they didn't have a backlight in this newer model. This one did not have a backlight at all. No backlight, just nothing at all. The thing with this one is that you had to get a worm light and use the worm light to be able to see this at night, just like the Game Boy Pocket. I mean, shoot, they already made a Game Boy with a backlight. Why not just put it in this newer model of the Game Boy Color? Well, because Nintendo's Nintendo, so they're going to do something that people don't like. But it's fine. Most people in the United States didn't even know about the Game Boy Light, so they just thought it was pretty cool to have a Game Boy Color. Now, the Game Boy Color had a kind of curved battery cover. It was sleek, very lightweight, so it didn't hurt your hands to hold. And it had its own separate types of games. Yes, it honestly did. It still played Game Boy original games, obviously. Just pop it in there, click the on button, and you're playing away Game Boy games. But it also had its own type of games. Like one of the games being Pokemon Crystal. Pokemon Crystal was a Game Boy Color only game for some reason. I don't understand why. But as you can see right here, you can see that it's playing the game. But if you try to put this game in a older Game Boy model, like say for instance the Game Boy Light, so you can actually see what I'm about to show you. You turn it on, it still shows Nintendo and it's going through. And what? Oh, you see it shows an error message. It says, this game pack is designed only for use on the Game Boy Color, because it's only for Game Boy Color. So, there were some Game Boy Color games that would still play on the original Game Boy, and they were in the color black for the cartridge. The only difference is that instead of original Game Boy games getting little sprouts of color, with the black cartridges, it would get full color. Like full color details, like all of it perfect. Like red, green, blue, all the stuff perfectly, instead of like little tiny sprouts of color for the cartridges, which was pretty neat at the time. It still uses the same port as the Game Boy Pocket, and it plays Game Boy original and Game Boy Color games. but there's no contrast feature. Unlike the original Game Boys, there was a contrast feature that you could change the lightness or darkness of the letters and gameplay depending on what lighting condition you were. But with this one, the only things are the port, the on switch, and the volume. And the speaker's not that bad on it, as you can probably hear. It's not that bad. But, yeah, this is one of my favorite Game Boys out of them. But, honestly, it's one of the ones that I don't use as much. It takes Game Boy, it takes 2 AA batteries. And, it gives you around 20 hours of battery life. So, still better than the Game Boy Pocket. And it had its own different library of games, which was pretty neat, honestly. Also, for some Game Boy games, it was easier to play with the different colors that the Game Boy Color gave it. Like Donkey Kong Land, instead of having it all green, it would show it in, like, the Donkey Kong, it would show him in brown, and then it'd show the enemies in green, and the background in kind of a grayish color, so it'd be easier to see, which would be way better for the system. And, yeah. But, since we're already done telling you all the stuff about all the Game Boys, let's go ahead and choose which one's better. Now, the original Game Boy is good for you if you want to have the old original hardware that started it all. Like, you're really nostalgic, you really want the original Game Boy, and it really don't have to be a small Game Boy. You don't care about the size, you just want to play Game Boy games. That's why you should get the original Game Boy. It's really good. Speaker's really loud, honestly. Let me go ahead and turn the volume all the way up for y'all. Probably 3 times louder than any other Game Boy model. But it's really loud if you have the volume all the way up. If you want to get this model, then it shouldn't really matter about the size. And then you should have a lifetime supply of AA batteries, because it takes 4 AA batteries for 35 hours of battery life. But I haven't had to change out these batteries more than 3 to 4 times, and I've had this for a year. So, it depends on how much you use it. But for the Game Boy Pocket, if you want to play Game Boy with still the original hardware, you don't want to play Game Boy Color games, you just want to play Game Boy games, and you need something that's sleek, small, and able to play Game Boy games and just hurry up and have it in your pocket without it getting messed up, get the Game Boy Pocket. You could easily just pop in a Game Boy game, and then blam, start to play it, and then, oh shoot, you gotta go. Your pockets are a little bit full, but it's fine. You slip it in your pocket or in your jeans pocket, and you're ready to go. Now, the Game Boy Light is if you have money. If you have, literally, if you have, like, unlimited money, you should get it. I mean, if you want a backlight and you have the money, you should get this. If you don't want to play Game Boy Color games, because it really helps for the backlight, definitely. See how much of a difference it makes. But the Game Boy Light is for if you don't want to use as much batteries, but also you have a lot of money to spend for a Game Boy. Get that one. The Game Boy Color, however, is good if you want to play Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games. If you still want to not use as much batteries as the original Game Boy, and if you just want a pretty neat color, it comes in a bunch of different colors. It comes in this pinkish red one, a yellow, green, blue, and I think an atomic purple. I'm pretty sure it was the one I used to have. But it's really good. But if you want with a backlight, choose the Game Boy Light if you have a lot of money to spend. If you don't have that much money and you just want to play Game Boy games, Game Boy Pocket. If you have a little bit more money and you want the original hardware, get the original Game Boy. And if you want to play Game Boy Color games and Game Boy games, and you just want to have a Game Boy where you could choose, get the Game Boy Color. Now, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you understood half the stuff I said, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the videos on this channel. My name's Hunter, and I'm out. Peace.